Hello, I'm Ben Brown. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. And let's start with developments in Georgia, where the Parliament has, in the last couple of hours, approved a bill on so-called foreign agents, which has provoked a political crisis in the country. There were scuffles and punches thrown inside the chamber of the Parliament, and large crowds gathered to protest outside. Well, the new law would force civil society groups and media organisations to declare foreign funding. Now, opponents fear that it would be used to silence dissent. The bill now faces a probable veto by the President of Georgia, but, and it's important, but Parliament can then override that veto by holding another vote, forcing the law through. Well, this really is an issue that's divided Georgia. Let's go live now to our correspondent there, Rehan Dimitri, who's in Tbilisi. I know it's very noisy there. There have been dramatic scenes outside the Parliament and inside, as I say, scuffles there. But the final upshot is this law has just been passed in the Parliament.
That's right, Ben. There is a dramatic scene. You can see this is the entrance to the main avenue that leads to Parliament. Riot police ready with their water cannons here. And the protesters also, they moved here. And some of them, we can see they're quite angry. They're coming and they're addressing these riot police and saying, look, these are our children, young protesters that have been demonstrating for nearly 3 weeks against the law. Are you really going to move in and try to disperse them? But we know that the government was adamant to pass this law. They did pass this law with 84 votes. The president, Georgia's ceremonial president, said that she will veto it. But the Georgian Dream government has enough votes in parliament to override it. So now we can see that the riot police are getting ready. They're holding up their shields. And what you can hear is the announcement. It's a warning in Georgian for protesters to disperse, and a warning that police might start using special means, as they say, to disperse the protesters.
Rehan, just give us the bigger picture here. This is clearly a controversial law, but it's a law which its opponents fear will push Georgia into a kind of Russian orbit and away from the West, away from the European Union. And many of those protesters, they want to join the EU, but they fear that this law will, in the end, stop Georgia becoming part of the European Union.
That's right, Ben. The reason why it has become such a contentious issue here in Georgia, because most of the protesters see it as a major turn in Georgia's foreign policy. And now you can see that the riot police is moving closer to the street that leads to the parliament, with this warning voice coming from the water cannons, warning the protesters to disperse. Protesters have been saying that this is potentially a turning point for their country, an existential threat, not just the law that they're worried about, but also a major turn for Georgia's foreign policy. Nobody here, out of these protesters that we've been following for all these weeks, they're saying that there is no way Georgia is going back to the USSR or back to the Russia's orbit. What they want is they want a European future for their country, and European flags have been featured in all the protests. You can see it everywhere, but now we can see that the riot police is moving in closer to the main protest area, which is about 50 meters from where we are now. And they are also being followed by water cannons. Riot police is also at the other side of the street, areas closer to the main parliament building. They're moving in, and doesn't mean that
Well, we can see there the scene there outside the parliament in Tbilisi, and as Rayhan was just telling us, the riot police with a standoff with the protesters. And of course Georgia, ever since it got independence from the Soviet Union, has faced bouts of violence, and there is a fear now that this political crisis could once again spill into violence on the streets of Tbilisi and Georgia. As Rayhan Dmitry was just telling us, this is really a moment of truth for Georgia, the passing of this legislation, because what it means, as Rayhan was saying, that really Georgia will follow the pattern that Russia set with its law on so-called foreign agents that was passed back in 2012, effectively cracking down on dissent in Russia. And it's a similar piece of legislation that has now been forced through the Russian parliament. That is why it has provoked such strong emotions on the streets of Tbilisi, as you can see, and so many fears that this will ultimately stop Georgia becoming a member of the European Union. And many Georgians are desperate to be part of the EU, to be part of the West, and to get out of Russia's orbit and President Putin's orbit. Rayhan Dmitry, our correspondent in Tbilisi, I don't know if you can still hear me. I know it's very noisy where you are, but just explain the situation. We can see you there. Just explain the situation as you see it now with the riot police and the protesters.
So we are at the entrance to the main avenue called the Rustaveli Avenue, which leads about 50 meters from where I am now is the parliament building. It has been a focal point for the mass protests that swept Georgia ever since the government decided to reintroduce this so-called foreign agents bill, dubbed by the protesters as the Russian law. And now we're seeing that half an hour after the government passed this law, riot police is moving in closer to the parliament area, where there are thousands of protesters a bit further down the street. It really shows, as the protesters have been worrying, they've been referring to their government as the Russian government. They believe that the Georgian dream is acting in Russia's interest by pushing ahead with this law, which so many people have been protesting for nearly 3 weeks.
And Rayhan, can you give us an idea? Those protesters, are they representative of many people in Georgia? Do many people agree with what these protesters are saying? Do you think that they don't want to see this law?
We know that more than 80% of the Georgian population, it's a small country, Ben, 3.7 million people, but the vast majority, more than 80%, want to see their country as part of the European Union. But there's deep polarization and also a lot of disinformation that has been coming from the government too, through their pro-government channels. A couple of days ago, the Prime Minister of this country, he cited their own survey that they conducted, and he claimed that more than 60% of the population in Georgia supposedly supports this law. But but that's not what we've seen in the past few weeks. We've seen mass protests a couple of days ago, attended by tens of thousands of people that came out specifically to say no to what they described as the Russian law. And what you're witnessing now, what you're seeing now, will also be interpreted by the protesters as the Russian method. These are peaceful protesters. They are exercising their right of assembly, and now, so now you can. The protesters are chanting "Sakartvelo" is the name of their country in Georgian. And over that side, Matt, if we can show, we're almost now reached the parliament area, and this is where the vast majority of protesters have been gathering for all these times. So the riot police is now moving closer to the parliament area. to clear it from the protesters. And this announcement that you're hearing is a warning to the protesters to disperse. Otherwise, they're saying that the police will use means to disperse the protesters. The police have used water cannons and pepper spray. You can see they're holding tear gas in their hands. And they have used it in the past because these protests, they have been going on, as I said, for more than 3 weeks. Some of the protesters are trying to stop the riot police by holding the Georgian flag here, but they are moving in. And you can see there are many more riot police behind the vehicles.